So, next sessions. I need Stan help for next sessions, okay? Because he's also part of the legal and regulatory team as well. So today live we have Lynn Lee, Senior Legal Counsel, Hong Kong and Compliance for Link Asset Management Limited, a Link-REITs company, and we have Natalie de Galma-Rose, General Counsel, Lane Crawford Joyce Group. Can we give a warm welcome applause to welcome the two live speakers? And as you can see on the screen, we have Angie Aoyong, VP of Chief Compliance Officer for Citrix. Angie, can you say something? Make sure we can hear you. I can't hear you. 1 second.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes,
now.
Thank you so much. I'm very sorry that I can't be in person today because of my company's internal guidelines, and as a Chief Compliance Officer, I probably should follow our own guidelines. So happy to see you all via Zoom.
Thank you so much for joining us, Angie. And we have Maria Eugenia Quindamel, also like to be called Maru, Executive Director, JPAC Regional Ethic and Compliance for AMGAN. Maria, can you say hello to us?
Good morning, everybody. I hope that you can hear me well, and thank you for the invitation. As Angie was saying, we do have very strict guidelines for our companies in the healthcare sector. So unfortunately, I cannot be face-to-face, but more than happy to be in this Zoom.
Right, okay. Last but not least, we have Fahad Javeen, all the way from the US. Fahad is the, sorry, I have to make sure I got it right. Managing Director for Asia Pacific, Concilio. Fahad, again, I think I have many friends here that joined this particular C Integrity since day one. Fahad used to base in Hong Kong, been in the legal and compliance industry for years and years since I know her. And also now she's managing Concilio, which is an e-discovery service provider based in the US, but for Asia cases. Fahad, can you say hello to everyone in Hong Kong? Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Sorry I cannot be there in person. I'm actually in New York right now, but I normally travel every month or so over to Asia. So I haven't been on a plane since March, which is a little bit different, but I'm happy to be here with all of you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm moderating, but Stan, our chairman, is going to help us with Stan, with some of the questions. So you won't see me because, I'll change the camera to the big floor and that sort of thing. So the first question is, okay, so I didn't put this together, okay? Originally, when we invited the panel Future of Dispute, we found that right now, most of the people that are in power in dispute are women, okay? So, or take up the position as general counsel are women. So, and when we invited our speaker, etc., and sort of thing, we're thinking that, well, since all are female speaker, we should put together a female cast. And in data privacy and cybersecurity is a complete different thing on the second session later, and it's all male. So we have questions that is going to distinguish how a female leadership and male leadership works when it comes to a litigation later. So the first question is, in your opinion, to all panelists, how do you think COVID-19 has impacted or influenced the current situation of dispute, conflict, and investigation? Let's just start with Angie first, shall we? Angie?
Sure. I think for COVID, like what Jack said in the previous session, because of the economic pressure, we do see a lot of our customers and partners and sales teams are trying to be more innovative to meet their quota. There definitely has been an increase in the allegations of fraud, and there's been more investigations on side letters and more disputes. Also, when people are not working inside the office, they tend to forget a little bit about the company policy. So we have to send out constant reminders to remind them that, hey, this is code of conduct, and also reminding them of the security measures and confidentiality. So yeah, generally, I think there's an uptick in cases around the world.
Okay. And Lynn, how about you?
Good morning. Can you hear me? It's on, okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn. I'm going to start with investigation first because that's mostly what I do. And with COVID, I see that it has increased the number of platforms in which we communicate with our staff, whether it's by WeChat, whether it's by WhatsApp, whether it's by email, telephone, Zoom, etc., etc. And the difficulty in that is that with all these different types of platforms, it's very difficult to gather evidence. I don't know whether Jad agrees. And when I conduct investigation myself, I often found that you've got streams of different evidence coming in at different pace, where they have different timestamps because the system might be different. So it's very difficult to correlate the evidence together and to see the bigger picture. With regards to disputes and conflicts, I think everyone is in a difficult situation at the moment all around the world. And as shopping mall owners, we're no different. And we see and we understand that the tenants are having great difficulties doing their business. And therefore, equally, we face our own difficulties as well. And the thing that I think we need to look into is whether you're looking to establish a long-term relationship or whether you are, just getting the cash in. And our company decided that we're going to focus on the long-term relationship going forward, and that's the reason why we have the tenant support scheme that we put forward. And also, we take a rather flexible approach in situations where there are difference in opinions or disputes.
Natalie?
You hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Our experience has been there's definitely been an increase in the requirement for dispute resolution, particularly with many of our external partners, which arises from serious economic pressure, very often insolvency proceedings, terminations of agreements that where people can't perform. So our experience has been that there's been a significant increase. And the approach, a bit like Lynn, has been to look at it and either take a view as to whether or not we're just going to cut our losses and run, or try and find a solution and build over a long-term partnership type view. In some cases, it's easier just to end it and call it a day for all the parties. What I've observed is that there's a need for very, very clear, frequent and consistent communication with my teams, and the need to develop new protocols about how these various platforms are to be used. I think people, as we've all observed, forget that they're sitting at work, albeit in their living room or their bedroom or wherever they are, and there's a different mindset, which is not surprising given it's all new to everybody, but something to be addressed. I think finally, I've observed that the leadership of the company has to develop or has to demonstrate more resilience, empathy, both internally and externally. So there's a higher burden on the leadership in circumstances like this.
Okay. Yourself, Maru?
Thank you. I have a little bit of a different approach because, of course, my role is more on the ethics and compliance. And then, of course, when people are in these very difficult situations, they tend to go from a collective type of approach or feeling to more on the individual type of approach. And then that is a probably natural behavior. However, as part of, when you are in a company and you have your company objectives or the goals, when they are a little bit far away from the employees, then that is when the gap starts to happen. And we saw in the previous discussion with the previous speaker that sometimes it's more on getting the individual gain rather than a collective objective. The other issue is sometimes when we have this type of situations where people are not coming to the office, they start to feel more disengaged, and they start to feel more about the center is never there again. Now, when you go to the office and you see your colleagues, and then you have probably the social network at the office, then that those touch points, believe it or not, are very important. So for me, it's very important that the tone from the top, the reassurance about the values and the code of ethics of the companies are there. The other element that is very interesting is I'm in the healthcare sector. Amgen is a biotech company, and sometimes there is also a lot of pressure to to get to the quotas or sales or whatsoever, as well as requests from the customers asking for PPEs and things like that. So it has been a very dynamic environment where we need to balance that out and say, what are the rules of engagement? What are the values that we have and we honor? And to do the reinforcements, as Natalie was mentioning before.
And last but not least, Fahad.
Yeah, I think these are all really great comments shared thus far. I think from my perspective as, the e-discovery vendor, and as Lynn mentioned, the evidence collection portion, I think with COVID and this pandemic, because everyone has shifted to work remotely, that also meant that we have to look at how we can provide these services remotely as well. So when you're doing data collection and providing document review services, typically this stuff is done in person or on site. We've always had the option to do this remotely, but as Jack mentioned earlier, the pandemic probably accelerated some of these other ways of doing these services by doing them remotely. I think for us in 2019, we had a disaster preparedness protocol in which our company prepared, what if we couldn't go into the office? What if there was a natural disaster or something to that effect, or something that limited us? So we certainly didn't expect that in 2020 we would have to implement all of this technology and virtual environments. I think there's also been additional scrutiny on security of data and being able to access this information. Certainly from the lawyer's perspective, the attorneys and solicitors who are representing end clients, because if everyone is now accessing this information from outside of the office, what protocols have been put in place to ensure that this information is being protected and not being leaked out on home networks and so forth. I think another thing that I've seen is, a lot of cases have fallen into a holding pattern, that they haven't necessarily moved forward. They're not proceeding in the courts. Some of our clients seem to be trying to settle instead of trying to pursue, I think, active litigation. And some smaller litigation or smaller cases seem to go away. So I think there's certainly some benefits as to how things have progressed forward. And I think it shows the advancement of our technology and the legal world and what we're in, that we can sort of implement all these different tools and techniques to ensure that we keep things moving with the roadblock that has been the pandemic.
Okay. These questions I asked during our dry run call, Natalie. I understand that, when we will talk about how during COVID, normally you wouldn't approach dispute this way, but now you're more inclined to negotiation style and ensure your clients or third party or supply able to comply, etc., and this sort of thing. Do you think, Stan, I actually asked you the same as well, versus a women leadership in dispute or in investigation versus male leadership in dispute and investigation, is that difference in this time of crisis?
Well, I wouldn't define it on male or whether you're male or female, actually. I think the approach that I take is very much situation-based. So depending on the circumstances, I might quote unquote take a more male approach, very direct, very, whereas in other situations, I might perhaps employ a more empathetic type approach. So I wouldn't personally see that my style comes down on one or the other type of approach, commonly associated perhaps with a male style or a woman's style.
So would you use the same rules that apply in dispute during this crisis? Sorry, during this dispute crisis?
I think, probably decisions as to what to do are taken more quickly, simply because every day costs money. So we will probably not give a lot of time to certain decisions that previously perhaps we would have taken a bit more time over and perhaps attempted to, resolve the situation differently. I think given the pressure that everybody's under, it obliges you to make a decision more quickly, actually, and then invest your time in those relationships that you really want to preserve over the long term.
Okay. Lynn, yourself?
I think I agree with Natalie that it really depends on the situation and depending on the issue which is before you. I wouldn't define it whether it's male or female. I mean, I've been known in my own office being the more aggressive one, even more aggressive than the males when it comes to investigation, but that's just part of my job and that's how things are done. I don't think it has anything to do with the gender.
Yeah, I agree to that. I also want to echo on it's more of a situational, you have to really look at the situation. I think now, really gender doesn't really coming into play, like especially during economic hard times. I think this is the time where you can build business relationship. It's like, okay, you have a situation where your customer, they owes money to you, right? So do you go aggressive or you don't go, or you go a little bit more empathetic? Well, I think right now it's the better choice is to go empathetic because you can say, I scratch your back now, maybe you can scratch my back later. Because, this is where instead of like going hard, going to the court, let's work this out together. I might not claim, let's say you owe me $10, I get $5 back. Hey, maybe further down the road, this customer would be even more loyal to me. So I think it's now, again, it's not really a gender discussion. It's really better to be empathetic. Although, yes, general perception is females are more empathetic than male. But I think you have to really read the situation and look long term and not be overly aggressive.
But you're a nice guy, though. Okay. Maru, last time we spoke, you were saying that during this crisis, there's a lot of risks that you didn't think about and suddenly emerge. And this risk, it all basically drill down to fraud and corruption. Can you just walk us through a little bit?
Yes, of course, I divide the risk in different kinds. When you have more of a financial risk where you see a lot of fraud for individual purposes, like gaining, and then you see probably fake receipts and in order to cash money during this crisis due to different circumstances. Sometimes it's because of the sales quarters are not getting the sales incentives that the people would like to get or they used to get before. So there is a big bucket of things of that sort where we see behaviors that, nowadays, and we're going to touch bases on this topic with analytics and other tools, we can identify relatively quicker than before. Thank you to probably COVID, but because it's accelerated all the process. So those are the things that I will call like more of a financial risk where we have, different kind of impact for the companies. But then a bigger impact is the corruption risk because of FCPA infringements, and it's just not FCPA today, is UK Anti-Bribery Act. We have in China very strong anti-corruption also laws. Korea, we are seeing more things happening also in other places in the Southeast Asia region. So those are what I call the frauding steroids. Why? Because what happens is the people tend to get a large fund that is basically given to them through, again, the same probably way, or it could be through the distributors agreements or through fake events or things like that. But then they use that money to bribe a governmental official. And remember, governmental officials are not just the Ministry of Health or the high level. In the healthcare world is also the doctors working at the government hospitals and the pharmacists. No, so that creates a little bit of a perfect storm, because the pandemic also has given a lot of stress to this particular group, and then there is a lot of issues coming on that side. And the third part is basically what happened during the pandemic at the beginning is the risk of donations. No, most of the governments were asking for help, either in money or in protective gear or something like that. We don't have medicines for COVID, but other companies, they have a lot of requests of that. So created also a big like door that if you don't manage it properly, it could be very, very risky. And we have seen so far a couple of DOJ enforcements right now, actually last month, regarding donations provided with probably the good intentions, but not with the best actors. So those will be, for me, the 3 steps, in order to think about this problem during COVID.
Okay, thank you. Last but not least, Angie, before we move on to the technology questions, Fahad, which I know, this is more your area of expertise. Angie, last time we spoke, you say that, because of the pandemic COVID, it accelerated your vision on compliance technology and how you basically want to drive technology, using technology to drive compliance. Can you walk us through a bit on that?
Absolutely, because I think as all the speakers, including Jack from the previous session, they explained how difficult it is to do this, to do investigations, etc. So what we are trying to move to is a data analytics where we can do continuous monitoring and pattern spotting. As you know, for all types of fraud, there is usually a set type of patterns, like what Jack said in his previous session. There will be an analytics piece, and one of his team will be thinking how the pattern will look like to feed it into the system. So we've just started doing more data analytics so that we can have a more continuous monitoring of the situation, both of our own employees and all our partner transactions. And obviously, even if the analytics is still at an infant stage, because this type of solution will usually take like 1 year to mature. But as soon as people know that you are watching them and having a continuous monitoring program, that behavior may change immediately. Also, I want to add that I think one of our previous speakers, Lynn, also mentioned now there's a proliferation of different platforms used, like WeChat, WhatsApp, emails, and other things. So at Citrix, we have just launched tighter security control. Now our employees can only work on company-issued laptop with monitoring, or they must use the company software. As for some of you, your companies may use Citrix solution. We enable employees to work from home in a secure fashion. So we are introducing tighter security controls also with YubiKeys. So this is an attempt to make sure that all forms of communication are only within Citrix authorized means of communication. Is trying to eliminate a proliferation of communication platforms and hoping to ease investigation should that happen.
All right, thank you. Looks like a lot of people pay attention to Jack. Okay, so before we move to our next segment, do we have any questions for the first segment here on the future of dispute? How our panelists handle dispute, investigation, and conflict? Nope. Okay, let's move on. Second questions. I mean, this is Fahad, this is for you, okay? Which process or solution will capitalize on the best feature of dispute? So are we, we know that Hong Kong Court is basically encourage people to use technology for dispute resolution sessions, encourage e-discovery provider to get involved more on evidence and searching and all that and stuff. Can you just walk us through how has that changed with using technology in dispute cases?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a great question. And I think it puts into play, a lot of the technology options we had in the past, that were available to clients and to counsel as well. As I mentioned earlier, that, we've always had remote data collection options, which means, you don't need to send a team on site to be able to do the collections work. I think naturally there's a comfort level for people to be face-to-face, and certainly pre-COVID, while we always presented this option to collect data remotely and to do this evidence management option, it's just always been less favored. And I think sometimes counsel and perhaps the corporate client can feel a little bit skeptical, whether this is forensically sound, whether it is the best approach, and they seem to be happy to pay for travel. And it means, we travel to different cities throughout China, throughout Taiwan, Japan, to go in person and do these collections. Now, with the pandemic, this basically forced everyone to look at this other option. And it meant that I think clients and, counsel who were on tight timelines had to give something else the opportunity because no one could fly. We can't really be in person because it isn't safe. So in doing all of this work remotely, where we then require support from the custodian, we require their time and their help as well to troubleshoot. From our side, our forensic team will be on video, we'll be on the phone, we can send a remote data collection kit, and we guide them on this process as to how to do this collection and what has to be done. So from a data collection perspective, certainly we've been handling many collections, depending on where we're based. Obviously within China, you need to use our team within China based in Shanghai. But for Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, we can have a forensic team based in Hong Kong, but is able to collect this data remotely and is able to do that in a sound manner and in a way that is obviously defensible. I think, the other point to that is also the document review services, where, contract attorneys to assist with reviewing documents, marking them for relevancy, privilege, doing issues, coding, and so forth. Typically, the contract attorneys or these, pool of lawyers will be sitting in a room of say 20, 30, 40 people. Sometimes we've gone up to hundreds of people. Again, with COVID, we haven't been able to do that. We can't have people, in big rooms together. And I'm talking about the US and Europe and certainly, in Asia as well. Certainly the US has not perhaps handled the pandemic as well as our Asian countries, I think, have done. And so, we need to think of a long-term strategy where, what is the option, or I guess the potential for us to still provide this solution and do it in a way that is, again, secure, that is safe. If we have contract attorneys based at home and these lawyers who are all, around the country, to ensure that they are accessing data from, approved laptops, security put in place, different protocols that have been tested. We also get clients asking us questions like, well, how do you ensure that, the attorneys or someone doesn't just take a photo of the laptop and maybe they can, screen print or save this information because we're not watching them. Well, we enable the camera, on their laptop. So our review managers actually monitor them to see what they're doing, but also in their software called Relativity, which is how you access the documents, we actually have a watermark on the back of the document, which actually puts that person's name on it. So on the back of, my screen, it would say my name. And if I took a photo of this and leaked this information to the public, we'd all know that it was me who did it because my name is on there. So, we've looked at a lot of different security protocols and enhancing our security measurements to make sure that we protect client data. We also have clients and counsel that ask us often to provide reports, to do ongoing testing. And certainly we've been doing this, on a bi-monthly basis to ensure that, we're keeping up the par with what's required. So, I think while we have these secure virtual options and we have remote options that we can offer, I don't think necessarily that the in-person option will ever go away. I think, a lot of people and certainly custodians, when they feel perhaps nervous as a part of the investigations process or litigation process, and we need to collect data, there's an element of a white glove service where, the e-discovery provider is coming in and able to do that work and take away all the technology and IT challenges and hassles and, collecting data appropriately. So while it won't ever go away, I think the remote option has been given a much better shot. And I think more clients and law firms do see this as a viable option in the future to keep costs down. So I think that's worked in everyone's favor.
From the end user point of view, Natalie, Lynn?
Our approach is, we actually, fortunately for us, we don't actually engage in a lot of litigation that requires that sort of data exercise. What I have done is actually spent quite a lot of money on couriers for original documentation, but otherwise we've just used the standard tools of scanning and so on. I'm going to take note of what Jack said about the scanning, because I hadn't really thought about the metadata, I must say, but I will be now.
Okay. Lynn?
I think I have the same comments with Natalie. We do spend quite a bit on couriers and looking at the real thing, and I like the touch and feel of real documents.
All right. Well, this is my third question. I mean, what about you, Maru? Before we move on, because I know Angie touched base on that already just now. So.
Yeah, I think we cover all the grounds on that, and it's very challenging with technology. And my recommendation is we need to speed up our awareness of the new technology to understand how things can be done. But always we are surprised. People are very creative.
Okay. So with that, the challenges comes that working from home. How many of your team are now working from home? Can I get a raise of hand? Or even yourself? Only 2? 3? All of you guys. Okay, well, most of the people actually now back to office. That's good to know. So working from home has now become a new normal. And for a lot of organizations now, they are thinking about, is that necessary anymore to actually have a physical office? So from a business standpoint, if that's the case, how do you guys deal with conflicts and investigation as well as dispute as well? I mean, if a normal legal route. Lynn, do you want to go first?
Working from home and carrying investigation at the same time is actually quite difficult. I mean, one of them, the primary method of investigation is interviewing people and seeing what they have to say on a specific issue. And then when you interview people, if it's face to face, then you'll be able to see their demeanor, what they're looking at, how their eyes goes. The physical gestures really has an implication on the credibility of the witness comments and statements, and I really focus on that. But with working from home, that's quite difficult. And then they can dodge the question. They can say that, oh, the camera's not working, etc. So, I mean, those bits that I will miss out on. So investigations would be a little bit delayed. I tend to, originally, usually I start with in the interviews, but then I kind of delay it until I have all the other evidence in front of me. It's just managing the way you gather evidence.
Right. Natalie, I know that you have a lot of suppliers and also third party are not based in Hong Kong, and in particularly, I understand that your team are based in Hong Kong. But so with this situation, how do you manage conflict then?
We have about 6,000 suppliers, and none of them are really in Hong Kong. I mean, one or two are, but basically all of our suppliers are international, so they're all over the world. We work a lot with Zoom rather than traveling to negotiate or do what we would normally do. And what I've observed is that has created a discipline which I'd like to take forward, actually, which is to provide very detailed agendas, very detailed information exchange prior to these Zoom calls or meetings. That actually is quite a good discipline, and hopefully will be taken forward. I think the nature of the tools also can assist in dispute resolution, because you can't talk over people. You can't interrupt people in the way that you would in a physical meeting. And actually, I find that can be quite helpful in the sense that everyone is allowed to make their point and then take away. However, when it comes to creative brainstorming, and we are a creative business, Zoom is really very limited. It's not helpful at all. And I find all our creative teams have found it.
Put your mic a little.
Sorry, our creative teams have found it very, very difficult. And what happens is there'll be a call, and then everyone has to go away and think about it and come back. And the whole process is very much longer than it would be had you been in a physical meeting. I think there's also just been a use of sensible tools like SharePoint and OneDrive and all that sort of thing, which people didn't perhaps use as they might have done historically. That's all been a positive development. And I think finally, in terms of behaviours, a requirement for accuracy and transparency, which avoids the misunderstandings that would be avoided naturally in a physical meeting. Those sorts of behaviours have become increasingly important, I think, in the use of these tools.
Any comment from you, Maru or Angie, on this point, working from home?
Maru first?
Yes, I think, well, for the investigation part in particular, e-discovery is a must, no? Because you don't have a sense, of course, you can use some Zoom techniques and try to place the other person in a position that you can see them, but it's very challenging. And normally the investigators, they struggle a lot with that, but there are some techniques that we had been implemented in my investigation team in order to look at, what is the type of responses that they do. Neuro-linguistic programming also, it has been handy for us to use some of that and to try to see what are the veracity of the statements. But I think that e-discovery is key in order for the investigator to build up. And then, of course, working from home always has pros and cons, no commute and things that are a little bit easier. But on the other hand, if all the family is at the house, it's very challenging, and mostly in Hong Kong environment. So we need to be also empathic to that kind of situation. And at Amgen in particular, we have implemented a lot of flexible hours and other tools in order for the people to manage themselves during that pandemic time. Angie?
So I would like to echo what Lynn, Natalie, and Maru says. And I think in addition, we have to remember building a compliance culture, and our own employees are always our first line of defense. So it is very important to keep them engaged and connected, like what Maru said, not at the family. So, for example, we are thinking of whether we should roll out a series of short video trainings where they can consume the information quicker or easier instead of waiting for a once a year compliance training, and more constant messaging to our employees to remind them that working under this new normal, what we have to pay attention to.
Okay. Stan, I understand that you run a white hat compliance, working from home. Is that a challenge for you guys?
Well, that is only a hobby, but my actual day job, yes, it's I'm still working from home now, but I really, I sense some of the things that, like, investigation. I sometimes do that, and it's just not easy, and it's not even impossible if you are not face to face with the person. But seems like for the past 10 months or so, we have somehow showed to the corporate people that even working from home for the legal department, it works, right? So I'm afraid of that trend continuing, to say, well, you've been able to function properly quite well working from home. So really, continuing doing this. But I think that's the flip side of the coin. I have to also constantly inform the corporate people to say, well, there are some issues I simply couldn't handle with just working from home. So it's just also the communication also has to coming from our side too. So I'm echoing what Angie's saying. Yes, corporate should continue to keep the internal staff or frontline staff engaged, but we also have to kind of provide constant feedback to the headquarters or senior management team of what's working and what's not.
That's a devil advocate here question. So I'm going to ask Natalie, because I did ask you last time we were in the call. Since that because the staff working from home or anywhere, you can now access talent, not just in Hong Kong. Because, access, I guess, compliance people and legal professionals in Hong Kong is quite tough for the last few years, because all the banks keep taking them. Now that there is a pool of talent that is actually not based in Hong Kong, but it is in US or Europe or somewhere else, and working from home is just managing through technology, that is viable now. So would you consider that kind of option?
Interesting enough, in our senior management, we've recruited one person from New York who works the majority of the time in New York. We recruited someone from Italy who worked in Italy for a significant amount of time. He's actually now come into Hong Kong. But the short answer is that it did work. They didn't need to move from New York or move from Italy and come into Hong Kong. And I think, for some things like maybe, anything that doesn't involve creativity, it's relatively straightforward. But when you're designing a marketing campaign with a team of people, doing that on Zoom is really, really difficult. I mean, it's very, very hard. You also miss all the non-verbal cues, all the interaction that creates that experience and creates that.
So a challenge for all panelists that your board or your CEO might ask you that, since they're working from home, it could work. You could just stay at home. Is that what happened? Okay, well, let's move on to our next segments. Any other questions on how, panelists manage their legal team and compliance team working from home before we move to our last segment? No? Okay. 1 second, let me see if there's questions. Oh, there's a question, 1 second. Okay, the question is, I'm not sure who wants to answer this. Site visit or field investigation is one of the most effective approach in a process of investigation. What do you suggest an alternative as a replacement method for site visit that provide equal effectiveness to an investigation? Oh, Jack. Any panelists want to take that? That's difficult. Then?
So something instead of a site visit. I mean, good building plans. I mean, for us, I mean, we're shopping mall owners, so good building plans. We got DMC plans, and I think there's this. I mean, subject to Jack's confirming this 3D video thing. I don't know exactly the name, but I know that the Coroner's Court is using it. A lot of the court is using it, requiring the experts to prepare a 3D simulation in relation to the site where no certain incident happens. And I mean, we could utilize that in the future.
And Fahad, are you guys been using cloud now this day to process document and evidence and review?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've certainly had clients ask us about that. I think depending on the country and where we're hosting data from and accessing it, for example, ensuring that we're GDPR compliant, in China for state secret concerns, we're still using our main brick and mortar, but we do have clients asking us about that as an option. To answer the site visit question, though, I agree with the 3D modeling. I think that's one approach that you can use, in order to see sort of what the options are and what's out there. Yeah, I think it just really depends on the requirements of the investigation and the litigation itself. I think we mainly want to ensure the security of the data and access is locked down. So the cloud is a bit of a gray area for us.
All right, very quick. We move on to last segments because I think we have 5 minute time. What is the biggest challenge? What are the biggest challenges in overcoming white collar crime in a time like this? What are the measures that the panelists use to tackle them, i.e. fraud, corruption, misconduct, or money laundering, etc.? Let's start with Marufus, because I know you are advocate in this area.
Yes, I think, well, the best and the most important one is to have a very close touch with your employee base. Now, we talk a lot about, the compliance done from the top, the reassurance, the bites on the code of conduct and the values of the company. I think that's the first thing that you need to do. And then the managers to approach their own base groups, like in a smaller amounts. That's probably the key. The second that is very important probably is to set quotas and setting, targets that are reasonable with the current situation. At the beginning of the year, what was happening was more of the ostrich technique that, well, it doesn't happen, nothing happens. And then the people were very stressed out because they were like, well, a lot of things are happening and the amount of sales are not coming in as they were in a normal year. So we need to readjust probably as we go with this unprecedented situation. And the third very important point is to coach the managers to start to detect the early signs of that drift. People don't go rogue in general. In my experience with compliance for 15 years, they don't go crazy one day. It can happen, but in general they don't, or they start doing a big default or a big fraud case. They start small, and that's where I feel like training the managers and coaching them to have a sense what's going on is very important. And last but not least, we have talked about a lot of technology today. We do have a lot of analytics that probably companies have been pushed to implement them. And then there are also automatic KPIs that you can implement in the background, and then to start looking at what are these trends and behaviors. So, but for me, it's more on, the human factor is the most important thing, because you can have analytics and you can have a lot of tools like that, but if you don't read or sense what is happening, it's not very easy to maneuver. That's my point of view.
Angie?
Yeah, I think that is so true. People actually don't go crazy one day. They start small, and it is very important to keep the pulse, on what exactly is happening in the field. And I think apart from COVID, the laws keep changing and is actually making it very difficult to keep up with all the changes. So I think now it requires all of us to think about compliance in a more holistic way, instead of just saying, oh, just get it done. It's not just getting it done, but there should be a different kind of strategy on how we should address this. Technology is one issue, security and how we should be conducting the training, building a compliance culture, and last but not least, how we can adopt a risk-driven approach to compliance. What matters and what are our priorities, since probably we can't do everything all at the same time.
We just have one last time for Lynn. Do you want to answer? I mean, please comment on that. I mean, the measure that you would take this time to reduce white collar crime.
I think, I mean, we've been quite lucky in terms of our processes, because we've experienced not much white collar crimes in our bits anyway, and that's probably due to having good policies and procedures in place. We have good counter checking in place, and also good training to our staff, so that they are quite acutely aware of what is expected of them, and so we don't really have that much of a problem in terms of collar crimes. But a lot of the things that we do is to put things in the processes in electronic format. So approvals are all electronically done. It's monitored. It's counter checked by other departments and not just their own, and that kind of keep things intact for us.
Okay. So Fahad, can I sum it up that we do need human to run dispute, but deploy technology is the way to go for the next 21st century of managing dispute, conflict, and investigation?
Yeah, that sounds like a great sum up to me, Jeffrey. I think, as everyone said here, especially Maru, I think benefiting from analytics and some of the technology that we have, it sounds like for everyone here, it's benefiting their prep where there are cases that can leverage technology. There may be some element of comfort with humans and them being involved in the cases and how we run that. But as Maru said, we do need to pick it up and speed up here a little bit more with technology. And I think if there's one positive that's come out of the pandemic, it's everyone's uptake and I think comfort level with technology, because we've all just had to figure it out. I think everyone has to fix their computer themselves, fix Zoom themselves, do everything themselves as well. So I think adopting that from a legal case prep perspective within conflict and investigations is really important. So this is the way forward.
Great, thank you so much. Can we give a warm welcome, thank you, applause to our panelists and also our chairman for today. So we are going to just take 1 minute while we swap over to another speaker, which is Michael Dugan from the SFC, as also Christy Leung from Winston & Straw. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Angie, Maru, and Fahad, if you can see me.